So tonight, we're on the right speech section of the Noble Eightfold Path. And I want to mention before I start that according to the Buddha Sutras, the Buddha was once asked two very similar questions. And his answer was the same for both. These questions were, what is the most destructive organ in the body? And what is the most helpful organ in the body? And his answer for both was the tongue. Yeah, it's so true. If you really think about that, take that home. So, again, tonight I'm going to offer you some thoughts on what is considered the third of the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path, which is right or wise or skillful speech. And whenever I get to this part of the path, I always love to remember that the Buddha thought that this was so important, that skillful speech was so crucial to our spiritual development that he gave it its own step. And he did this for many reasons. And maybe the most important is that our speech, if you notice, is actually, it's incredibly powerful. It's incredibly, incredibly powerful. You know, it can create an environment that contributes to the happiness of both ourselves or others, or it can create an environment of anger and harm and great suffering. You know, it can really go both ways, can it? Speech can go both ways. And I think we can all see this being played out right now on the world stage, can't we? It's like the kind of negative influences and the real consequences, right? The true harm that comes from harsh and hateful speech. There are consequences. There's this old Buddhist folktale that points to this incredibly influential power of speech. And it's another one of what are called the Jataka tales, which are supposedly tales of the Buddha's other lifetimes before he became the Buddha, thousands of years. And these are the legends anyway, when he was still learning how to be a Buddha. And apparently, there was once a great elephant who was owned by a king. So it's usually kings in these stories, aren't there? Could switch that to queen. Maybe we'll say it's a queen. But this elephant was known for its kind and gentle disposition for as long as anyone could remember this elephant. But one year, a group of criminals apparently started gathering near this elephant's stall each night. And as you might imagine, these criminals, their speech wasn't that skillful, and it was often cruel, and they swore up a storm, and they were unkind not only to one another, but to other people. You know, they spoke harsh words about others, and they encouraged one another to commit all sorts of criminal acts and cruelty and, you know, things like theft and rape and even murder. And this is what the elephant was listening to. And after a while, this elephant began to believe that these harsh words were intended to teach him that he should behave in similar ways. And as a result, this formerly noble, regal elephant became murderous and would try to kill anyone who tried to work with him. It's a really aggressive elephant. And of course, the king who owned this elephant was, of course, really distraught and called upon his minister to try to figure out what was wrong with the elephant. And so in the Jataka tales, the Buddha is always either an animal or a saint or a person or a god. And in this case, the Buddha was the minister. Okay, so this minister is trying to figure out what's wrong with this elephant. So the minister visited this elephant regularly in its stall to figure it out. And one evening overheard the criminals in their speech and saw how deeply it had affected this elephant. And he advised the king to send these criminals away and send in their place a group of wise sages who were known for their gentle and compassionate speech to talk together near the elephant's stall each night. Okay? And as you might imagine, again, after a while, this gentle, wise, kind speech of these sages soon started to influence the elephant to return to his gentle and kind ways, and he was apparently never cruel again. That's the tale. to use a more modern version of that, and that example of the power of speech, just this year, many of you might have seen, there was a study at a school in Dubai to raise awareness about anti-bullying. Anybody see this one? It was filmed, and afterwards it went viral. And the reason it went viral was because the results were really outstanding. And so for an entire month, 2 plants were kept in identical conditions with the same amount of light and water and fertilizer. And the children at the school had been asked to record both negative and positive comments, including all the playground bullying, all the comments that they heard, on the playground, these awful things. And these recordings were then played over and over to these 2 plants, which again had identical water and light and everything. And one of them received the positive comments, and the other one received the bullying ones. Anybody see this? Yeah. And so by the end of the month, the plant that had been on the receiving end of the bullying was visibly dying. Its leaves were all withered and droopy, and it was yellowing. And the plant that had been told nice things was thriving and growing taller, and it had crisp green leaves and flowers. And it was pretty amazing to watch. They filmed these things. So it's on video. And of course, people were then commenting on, how if the content of our words have this type of effect on plants, what kind of effect must they have on human beings? In the Therigatha, the verses of the elder monks, one of the first Buddhist nuns, Kisa Gotami, tells us, if one resorts to noble friends, even a fool becomes wise. Stay with them of good heart, for the wisdom of those who stay with them grows. So I'll repeat that again. If one resorts to noble friends, even a fool becomes wise. Stay with them of good heart, for the wisdom of those who stay with them grows. So with the practice of right speech, this means we're being asked to consider not only what we're saying, but truly what we're listening to all day. What are we listening to all day? We're being asked to consider the people that we surround ourselves with, which today, by the way, includes things like the movies we watch, the TV shows, and what we might be reading or watching all day on the internet. What books are on your bookshelves? You can think about that. That's truly an influence. Listening, the way of listening. But also, really, what do you click on? What do you click on when you're browsing the internet? That's what you're listening to, just like those criminals that the elephant was listening to. It's really true. The teacher Barbara O'Brien offers us this story about the power of listening. She says, once I took a cab ride with a driver who was listening to a radio talk show. The program was a litany of the host's resentments and anger towards other individuals and groups. The cab driver apparently listened to this poison all day long, and he was quivering with rage. He responded to the litany with foul expletives, occasionally slapping his hand on the dashboard for emphasis. The cab seemed filled up with hate. I could barely breathe. It was a great relief when the cab ride was over. This incident showed me that right speech is not just about the words I speak, but also the words I hear. Certainly we cannot banish ugly words from our lives, but we can choose not to soak in them. We can choose not to soak in them. So right or skillful speech is actually the first of what is considered the sila, S-I-L-A, or moral conduct virtue section of our path. And it's really what the entire path is built on, sila. So sila is all about how we use our bodies and their very real power, right? In the power of our speech, in the power of our actions, and in the power of our livelihood. That's the sila section. And with sila, our focus is really on our intention and our practice of ahimsa, which is no harm. Our commitment to not bring any more suffering into this world, along with our intention and practice of actually helping to create less suffering for ourselves and others, those two things. So sila is really, if you think about it, the thread of heart, compassion, that ties together the entire practice. Without this thread, we're really not going to have a strong spiritual practice, are we? Right? You know, we're going to have a practice that's going to be a bit loose and easily pulled apart in the wind of life, if you will. When everything hits the fan, if we don't have that thread of heart holding everything together, it's going to easily fall apart. Without sila, our practice can sometimes become a kind of self-improvement project or self-serving practice that we think will make us feel more calm and balanced and peaceful. But what it lacks is that transformational aspect of compassion. That's key and essential in this practice. It's not just about being aware. And right speech is where the practice of sila starts. It's where it starts. And I like the way the modern monk and scholar Thanissaro Bhikkhu describes this. He says, if you can't control your mouth, there's no way you can hope to control your mind. So I like that one. As a quick review, the 8 spokes in the wheel of the Dhamma chakra, the wheel of the Eightfold Path, is divided into 3 sections. Wisdom, which is panna or prajna, ethics or moral conduct, sila, and then mental discipline, samadhi, the concentration practice. So wisdom includes right understanding or view or intention, which we've talked about. And then ethics, sila, which is speech, action, and livelihood. And then mental discipline, which includes effort and mindfulness and concentration. And those are all a little bit different, though they sound similar. And again, as I've said before, we need all 3. All 3 are crucial. And one of the reasons I think right speech is honestly one of the most difficult aspects of practice is because our speech is so often totally spontaneous and automatic, isn't it? Right? Just like we tend to automatically believe most of our thoughts, and then we act on those thoughts, right? It's like automatic. We're an automatic pilot a lot of the time. And what happens is that we tend to translate whatever we're thinking or believing into our words, which then become our attitudes, which then become our actions. So I think last week I mentioned that famous quote by Gandhi, which is, your beliefs become your thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits become your values, and your values become your destiny. So true. And it starts, by the way, that whole string starts with our beliefs. So last week I spoke about right intention, which is part of the wisdom section of the path. And intention is actually essential when we consider right speech. Okay? So to review very briefly, right or skillful intention, with this, the Buddha asks us to actively and consciously remember and practice 3 things, which is renunciation is the first one, nekkhamma, letting go, mostly of our selfishness, our sense of everything all about me. That's what we're letting go of. The second thing is to nurture goodwill, metta, loving kindness. And the third is to not intentionally harm ourselves or others. That commitment, ahisma again. Those 3 things. At the same time, the practice is also asking us to be on the lookout for what are called unskillful motives, or maybe unskillful intentions, if you want to think about it that way, to actually consciously be on the lookout for that. So we're being asked in a way to listen very closely to the committee of voices in our own heads, and question them. Be aware of what are you saying to yourself all day? What am I believing? Really look at it. That's so much a part of the practice. Thanissaro Bhikkhu again tells us, then if you see any unskillful motives lurking behind the committee's decisions, you veto them. We have veto power. It's not good to know. So along with our own minds and the committee that's in there, we're also being asked to listen very carefully to what the person or the people we're communicating with, what they're saying. Listen to that. And we want to assess where they might be coming from and listen to what they're believing, what are they trying to express, and asking ourselves what they might need in the moment. And if you notice, that has no self in it. It's all about listening is really about questioning, being with this other person or people. And then we need to reflect, when it is our turn to speak, how our speech is going to land on them. We have to assess that before we speak. How is this, what I'm going to say, how is this going to land? Not after we do it, but before. And finally, we need to ask ourselves if our speech is aligned with our three intentions. Is it aligned with a sense of letting go of me, right? A self. Is it kind? Is it something that might be harmful if I say this? So all of these things need to go together. Super easy, right? I got that. Not so much. So let's start with speech that's considered harmful. So right speech means very mindfully and consciously avoiding these 4 types of harmful speech. And you might notice again that all of these include intention. Harmful speech also includes intention. Okay? So one is lies. Words spoken with the intent of misrepresenting the truth. Okay? So it doesn't even have to be a bold-faced lie. It could just be, I'm kind of misrepresenting the truth here. Then there's divisive speech, which is spoken with the intent of creating rifts between people or groups of people. There is harsh speech, which is spoken with the intent of harm, actual intent. I want to hurt you with my speech. I want to say this mean thing, a little dig, or a big dig. And then I find this one interesting. The 4th one is idle chatter, which means it's spoken with no intent at all. So for the purpose of time, I want to focus on the 5 categories of that 4th type of harmful speech. You don't have to keep track of all these numbers. But these 5 categories, which is harsh speech. So the first category of harsh speech is angry speech, and this includes sarcasm. And I know many of us might be thinking, well, wait, isn't a little bit of sarcasm kind of okay sometimes, right? I kind of like sarcasm sometimes. But with this one, it's a really good experiment to take a good look into your heart and again at your intention. Look at your intention when you have something that you want to say that's sarcastic, right? So when you're resorting to sarcasm, you might ask, am I trying to cover up a real criticism and laughter as a way to deflect it in some way? You might also consider, how do I think this sarcasm is landing on the other person or maybe other people? How is it really landing, right? So for instance, the other person that you're being sarcastic about in the room maybe, might likely laugh along while all the other, with all the others in the room, but they might secretly harbor some hurt, right? It also, sarcasm, I find, is a way of avoiding intimacy, isn't it sometimes? Okay, so on a personal note, for instance, I have a particular relative of mine that I have never, ever been able to get close to, because absolutely every single word is a joke. Anybody know anybody like that? There's no getting, it's all sarcasm. most of it's barbed, but there's never an actual, real, genuine conversation. And I kind of feel sad about this because I feel like I should be able to break through, and I just have never been able to. So it can be a way of avoiding intimacy. You can just look at that. So the second category of harsh speech is belittling, called belittling speech, which is less hidden than sarcasm, actually. And it's meant to do exactly what it sounds like, belittle, make someone feel smaller than you or small by putting them down, sometimes in a continual or ongoing way. Someone can belittle you, maybe in your family or at work, or a friend can constantly kind of belittle. And this can often be delivered in the form of questions like, you should really know better, or why are you so stupid, or why would you think that? Why would you do it that way? Sometimes it comes in the form of questions. You can just look at that. And the third category of harsh speech is unnecessarily loud speech. Okay? And this can happen in both private and public conversations, even restaurants and parties. And it's considered aggressive because, again, like belittling, in a way, the person who's being loud is trying to be bigger and louder, more important than everybody else who's talking. My voice is louder than, right? It's bigger than. So the fourth category includes the actual words that you choose, to use, and the tone of your voice that you use in delivering these words. Tone of voice is really important, isn't it? It's not just the words. Some of you may have relatives, for instance, who know the exact word and the way to say it that is totally going to set you off, right? Right? It's like pushing the big red button, just with their tone. They're actually using their words as a way to hurt us, to hurt you. And your tone of voice, again, can mean everything, as in the case of that lovely Southern phrase that I learned when I moved here 20 years ago, which is, bless your heart. I thought that was a really nice thing for a while, until I figured it out. Bless your heart, Yeah. So the fifth category of harsh speech is cursing. And again, it's considered aggressive because its intent is often shock. It's aggressive, actually. It's considered aggressive. And it actually, sadly, tends to reinforce your own anger, even if you're not angry when you swear. And I did grow up north where we did that a little more often than we do here now down in the south. But I started checking it out, and it's actually true. If I use that word even at home, different words, it increases my own anger. So check it. Just start checking it out. If you swear often. So we mostly all know that we shouldn't use harsh speech. That's pretty obvious. But idle chatter is an interesting type of harmful speech, since this seems to be a never-ending trend in our modern society. And so we sometimes just talk to talk, don't we? And some people tend to do this more than others. The writer William Burroughs wrote, "Silence is only frightening to people who are compulsively verbalizing." So we do this actually for many reasons, just to put it out there, to check it out. Why? And we all do it at certain times, find ourselves talking for no reason. We just can't stop sometimes, right? It's like I'm just talking and talking. I don't know why I'm talking, And we do it for many reasons. And the first is we might tend to feel uncomfortable with silence, with the space of a pause. You ever in a car with someone, right? And it's like you'd have this urge to just keep the conversation going, especially if it's someone you don't know well. It's really hard to be quiet in a conversation, so there's that. We might feel responsible in some way. We might have this belief that we're supposed to, in some way, to entertain people, to keep the conversation lively. We might have that belief, which is why we just keep talking, okay? The third reason is we might be focused on our own needs and wants on ourselves, which is actually, again, part of the sub-reason we suffer. It's that sense of it's all about me, and there's no connection because we're just talking about ourselves and not listening, not really caring what the other person even has to say back. And the fourth reason is we just might not be trained in the art of listening, really, which involves setting aside our own thoughts, mindful listening, setting aside our own thoughts, and really engaging with what the other person is saying, really deeply listening for information to connect. Okay? With right speech, what we're trying to really learn and cultivate is the art of the pause, which means pausing between sentences. That might be the first step, right? Pausing between thoughts before we speak and before we act. The pause is sometimes called the sacred pause, right? So this involves being mindful of the need to slow down. And then in doing so, we can take a good look at our habitual thoughts and reactions, and then really experiencing what we're feeling without automatically acting out on these feelings. All of that can be in the pause. I can see what I'm believing and feel what I'm believing here. And then I have the power of choice, right? So with this pause comes our power. This is where our power lies in practice, because we no longer need to spontaneously, automatically open our mouths and just let the words pour out anymore, right? Viktor Frankl wrote so concisely about the power of the pause. Many of you may have heard this. He said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom and power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. That last part. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So in the pause, we can mindfully choose our words with intention, which is giving us the power to create good for ourselves and others, right? And by the way, our choice might be to say nothing at all. That can be a choice. That was something I had to learn. I still learn sometimes, right? And there's an old Buddhist saying, which is, speak only if it improves upon the silence. You know, it's very true. So to help us with what to do after the pause, the teachings give us 5 keys to right speech. Here's another list of 5 things. And these are 5 things we need to consider when we do finally choose to speak, okay? We make that choice. Is it timely? Is it truthful? Is it kind? Is it beneficial? And is it spoken with a mind of goodwill or no harm? All those things. A lot to remember. So that last question actually is considered the most important because, again, it reflects our intention to not harm. And we need to be honest with ourselves when we're investigating this, really honest. So sometimes in the pause, I ask myself simply, honestly, I ask myself, what would Buddha say? What would Buddha say? Or what would Buddha do right now? What would Buddha do? How would Buddha be? And within this last question, then, there are more questions we can ask ourselves, which are, what is my intention? You know, what part of my heart am I speaking from? What part of my heart am I speaking from truly? What is my underlying belief right now in this particular conversation? What am I believing? You know, especially when we're in an argument. Wow. Each person has their own beliefs and they're conflicting, right? It can be really difficult to suss that out. And it can be really difficult to access our hearts in that moment. Because a lot of time, what do we want to do? We want to blame, don't we? Or we want to defend. Okay? And where's the intention in that? Where's the heart in blame or defense? Where is it? It's not there, is it? Is it? What is my need for saying what I'm saying? Why am I saying this? Why am I talking? Right? So when we can take a look at these four things, we might discover sometimes that we aren't saying what we're saying for the benefit of the other person, but to satisfy some need of our own, right? Again, maybe to protect or defend a sense of self, maybe to puff up our sense of self, define, I'm this, I'm that, define ourselves, or maybe to solidify our sense of self with our need to be right, right? I'm solidifying my need to be right here, myself, my identity. This doesn't, by the way, in any way mean that our needs are wrong or selfish. We all have our needs. It's important to remember that. For instance, sometimes we might feel the need to be heard or listened to. You know, you're not listening to me. That's my need. I need to be listened to. Or we want some empathy or understanding. And the great news is, guess what? We can ask for that. When we can see our need, we can ask for that. You know? Knowing that's what we need instead of doing it sideways. Sometimes we don't even know what we need, and so we do all the stuff sideways, right? We yell or scream or defend or prop up, when really we can access our need, you know, and bring kindness to our own hearts. That's really going to help the whole conversation. Sometimes, for instance, we might be feeling afraid or vulnerable in some way, and so we keep talking so that we can keep that feeling at bay in some way, or we defend or blame, so we don't have to feel that sense of hurt or vulnerability. When we're being mindful of our own needs, though, we might notice that our real need, again, is to connect, right? To bond, which is really what we all want, don't we? Don't we? Our deepest wounding, our greatest source of suffering, as I've said before, is our sense of being separate, right? And so, you know, we have this need to connect, so we can notice that. And I want to mention that sometimes within this need to connect, we might have harmful speech, or harmful intention, rather. And the way this works is you might notice your need to bond over a mutual dislike for someone, right? Like, oh yeah, that person, oh, we really, you know, like link arms, like I really don't like that person, and then you feel more connected, right? Or, you know, you might have a mutual dislike for some group of people, or, you know, honestly, it's kind of funny, but it's so harmful. You know, maybe people who you believe, quote, aren't like us, those other people who aren't like us. And this is how tribalism happens, and this is how wars start, right? Because you're bonding over a mutual dislike. That's harmful. That is wrong intention. Check it out. We all do it. It's so harmful. You might even ask yourself, am I gossiping to make myself feel better? Again, to bond in some way. Or maybe to enlist the other person or people in feeling better than. Right? That's what gossiping is a lot of the time. And it can seem really innocuous, gossiping. But again, it's so harmful. I remember, many of you may remember this game when we were young. You know, the teacher in our classroom would play this game, I think in elementary school, where we all would sit in a circle and the teacher would whisper a story into one of our ears, right? Like I would whisper to Kathy or something here and it'd go around. And by the time it came back around and the person was asked to share the story that they'd heard, it was completely different. Anybody play that game when they were young? It's fascinating. Telephone, that's what it's called. It was completely different. And so the pattern goes like this. You say something to a really close friend and you think, well, it's only so-and-so, so what's the harm, right? And then your friend shares this with their spouse, and then their spouse shares it with his or her best friend, and it goes on and on and on until the entire town, knows of this thing that you said to a close friend. And again, by the time it gets out, it's not even accurate, okay? So consider the source, too, whenever you're hearing gossip, and question it, right? In my old Sangha in Brooklyn, New York, there was a very wise, older Buddhist woman who I really admired, and I miss her dearly. And she once started practicing some of the deeper speech practices. And one of these practices involved not speaking about anyone who wasn't in the room with you. Isn't that interesting? Even someone you might be praising, she wouldn't do it. Is that person in the room? We're not talking about that person. And she did this for many reasons, but one of them was for the reasons I just stated. If the person isn't there to make sure that the person's report is accurate or to defend themselves, a false story might spread. It also puts either a positive or negative belief or view into the mind of the person who is hearing either the praise or the blame, and this is going to color their experience of that person. Right? Think about that. When we're investigating our need to speak, we might also consider these questions. Am I trying to correct someone or fix them or change them in some way? It's a hard one. Or maybe am I trying to get them to do something or believe something? It's a question. And all of these intentions that I just mentioned in those questions are actually also considered unkind, since we're assuming that we know better than that person, and again, we're in some way putting ourselves above them. That's all the unsolicited advice that we all love so much, right? Who in here likes unsolicited advice? Oh gosh, I don't see any hands. And yet, don't we all do it, right? So when we investigate, we might notice that our need is to help ourselves feel less uncomfortable with whatever that person is sharing or experiencing. That's our need. And you might notice that this happens often when people might be expressing emotions like sadness or anger. Then you want to change or fix sometimes, right? You shouldn't be feeling anger or sadness. That should be different, so I'm going to tell you how to fix it. I'm going to tell you how to get better. Because I know. Right? So instead of listening or maybe offering a hug, you might find yourself giving unsolicited advice, again, about how they can fix it, or telling them they have wrong thinking about something. You shouldn't think that way, or you shouldn't be feeling angry, sad, etc., which is the worst. Benjamin Franklin actually had a wonderful quote for this type of advice, which I like. He said, remember not only to say the right thing in the right place, but far more difficult still, to leave unsaid the wrong thing at the tempting moment. Right? So, at the same time, we're also being asked to actively, mindfully cultivate the skillful motives, which means consciously having the intention to speak in ways that are trustworthy and harmonious and comforting and worth taking to heart, okay? So I'll go over these briefly. Trustworthy. Trustworthy. When you very consistently speak with integrity and kindness, people are going to be more willing to listen to you, aren't they? And to believe you. Think about this one. So don't you start to not trust those friends of yours that you have who always seem to be talking about other people, right? Because it's like, even they talk about their closest friends. And so you're like, well, I'm one of their friends. So I wonder what they're saying about me, because this is a habit. That's not being trustworthy. So that one's really about your integrity. Can you have integrity? The other one is harmonious. speak in ways that are harmonious. So for this one, it can be telling to look at the definition of the word harmonious, which is forming a pleasing or consistent whole. And some synonyms are balanced, in proportion, compatible, well matched, in tune with, attuned. Okay? And with this one, again, we take a look at our intention. Is our speech intended to connect with the other person, to be well matched, in tune with? Or are we more concerned with how we are being received, more concerned with self? So again, all of this involves watching how our sense of self is coming in and how we try to either prop up, defend, or protect the self. And the third one, briefly, is comforting. And with this one, we can consider, is what I'm saying going to be of some comfort to the person or the people hearing it? Do you ever consider that? When you're saying something, is this really going to be comforting? You know? And again, this is another place where we can look at our heart and realign our intention. The final one is worth taking to heart. Worth taking to heart. Really like that one. So before we speak, we might again take some time to reflect on our intention by asking ourselves, is what I'm saying going to be of benefit to the person or the people hearing it? Is it going to benefit? Or is it going to cause some harm? Or maybe it's just idle chatter. Is it really benefiting, or is it just idle chatter? Check it out. So again, just to reiterate, in all of our communications, it's always helpful to remember what's most important is our intention in wise speech. Talked about intention last week, and this is how it rolls into sila, right? What is our intention here? And I find it helpful to think of a stone dropping into a pond, right? We really need to be mindful of our intention before we throw that stone, remembering that the effects of both kindness and ill will tend to ripple out. So you might ask yourself, what exactly is it with my speech that I'm throwing into that pond of communication, or this lake, or this ocean of communication? What am I throwing into it? Right? So I think I'll end there, and let's just have 1 minute of reflection. So I'll invite you into a sit. And so just taking a nice deep breath in, deep breath out. And those of you who would like to can place a hand on the heart and really just touch in here to the heart. I'm going to invite you just for a moment, with no judgment, just as a way of inquiry, to remember a current difficult communication. Something that was just a little difficult. What was your intention? Or maybe even what was your need? And really be honest with yourself. No judgment. This is just a way to reflect. And what would happen if the intention was different? Just a reflection. Could go either way. And maybe see if you can plant a seed of intention in the heart for your future communications. Can you plant that seed of intention in the heart? Finally, just listening to these words from Joyce Stutphin on how to listen. Tilt your head slightly to one side and lift your eyebrows expectantly. Ask questions. Delve into the subject at hand or let things come randomly. Don't expect answers. Forget everything you've ever done. Make no comparisons. Simply listen. Listen with your eyes as if the story you are hearing is happening right now. Listen without blinking, as if a move might frighten the truth away forever. Don't attempt to copy anything down. Don't bring a camera or recorder. This is your chance to listen carefully. Your whole life might depend on what you hear. I hope you enjoyed this talk. These talks are always offered freely so that no one is ever denied access to them. And your support or dana also makes a big difference. Dana is the ancient Pali word for spontaneous generosity of heart. If you feel inspired to continue to support these talks by offering dana, you can do so by visiting my website at www.mindfulvalley.com. Thank you so much.